The biggest differentiator is when the brand is associated with some person that is actively voicing an opinion of what's happening in a particular space.
Foundational law of retention and habit building is that your frequency of that habit is actually spent in whatever your use case is.
Once you've done that, you then need to find the next step, which transforms that hype, turn those wows into other wows.
How do we translate from the hype for people, and how do we actually translate that into real world value?
Everyone right now that's probably here is dealing with how do we build like durable growth and retention around AI, whether you're building a brand new product, whether you're layering it into an existing product. Those are all problems we're all facing. We've got a good panel here. I'll do a quick intro. So my background, I was at a company called ClickUp. It's a project management software. I was one of the 20th person there, head of marketing, VP of operations. We grew from about 4 to 150 million in ARR in 3 years. So that was a pretty fun ride. I'm at Craft now, Craft Ventures. I'm an operating partner there. I work with our portfolio on marketing and growth. A couple of notable companies that are pretty involved right now in the AI stuff. We have quite a few, but Replit and Supabase are two that I work pretty closely with. So that's me. For everyone here, like we said, adoption's a big thing. I'm going to intro everyone on the group. We got Brian to the left of me. He's the founder and CEO of Reforge. I've been a huge fan of them for a long time. For anyone that hasn't checked out their content before that works in this space, you're really missing out. But I'm sure everyone here has heard of them or seen stuff. Before Reforge, Brian was at HubSpot. He was a VP of growth for some of the sales products and has been around and is kind of a legend in the space. So thanks for being here, Brian. You've got Gaurav to the left of Brian. He was head of growth and many other things at Superhuman. I'm sure all of us have used Superhuman in some capacity for email. If you haven't, it'll make your life a lot better. Let's just say that. Gaurav also works with a ton of companies on the advisory front. He works with Clay, Momentic, GPT-0, Atria, and a bunch of others. He's seeing what's working across the ecosystem right now. And we have Bryce on the far left. He's the founding GTM engineer at Cognition. I'm sure all of us have heard of Cognition and what they're doing. I'm a big fan and being pretty close on the AI engineering space. And we're going to go into some topics today. First one, so converting hype into habit. That's probably one of the biggest things we see right now. There's a lot of hype around every AI product. No one's really hyper committed to anything at this stage, which is a really fun stage to be at. At ClickUp, we learned a lot of this in terms of like durable retention, coming from embedding AI into workflows. That's all happening right now. But we're going to basically explore how to move from the wow factor to actually durable habits. First question's over to Brian. So, I've been an early customer of Reforge, but, I've seen how you guys cut through the noise around growth, brand, thought leadership, everything. But what's the biggest retention principle that you think AI founders, product leaders, anyone that's building around AI should be thinking about as it relates to turning hype into habit?
Yeah, so one of the things I think a lot about is that AI is rewriting the rules around quite a few things, but there are some foundational laws to growing a product that it does not touch. But the fact that it is changing so many things kind of creates these clouds. It makes us forget that these foundational laws exist. And as a result, seeing a lot of history repeat from even like early Facebook days where a lot of hype, a lot of growth real fast, and then a lot of churn and churning. And so when we think about retention and churn, the foundational law of retention and habit building is that your frequency of that habit is actually spent in whatever your use case is. And what by use case, I mean, what is the problem that you're solving? Who are you solving it for? Why are they choosing your product over the competitors? And most importantly, how often do they experience that problem in their real life? That is the ultimate question that you are trying to get to. And that dictates what we call your natural frequency of your product. Now, you can increase that frequency a tiny bit over time with building a great product, expanding that product portfolio to additional use cases and a bunch of other things. But at the end of the day, that is where you are limited, is understanding what the natural frequency of your user problem is. And when you try to violate that law, meaning you're trying to take something that is actually a monthly frequency and turn it into a daily frequency or something vice versa, that's where companies fall over and they fail. You end up with all of these experiences where teams get into this trap where they're just plastering the product or email, like sending out all of these notifications to try to build the habit and increase that frequency, and they don't respect that foundational law. and it just ends up being a terrible product and actually doesn't lead to any sort of growth. And so that is like the foundational law of retention, is understanding your use case, the problem, the natural frequency of the problem. Everything else builds from there.
Great point. I think, Gaurav, I have a specific question for you because I know you dealt with basically what we would call like the daily habits around email as one of those particular areas, something I was a firsthand user of for a long time and still am. For people building AI in the room, what should they be thinking about for ensuring their product basically addresses like a real frequent need and maybe builds off of what Brian mentioned as it relates to use cases, and then not over forcing it, but doing something that feels natural and organic?
Yeah, makes sense. I think it's another foundational law I would put on the table, which kind of builds on top of frequency of problem encountered, is companies that have some kind of natural network effects have always been the ones that grow the most, right? And so if you're thinking about what your startup can do to grow, in the short term, yes, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of buzz around unlocking new use cases and the land grab of new customers that you might feel like you're in kind of hand-to-hand combat with your competition all the time. But in the medium to long run, if you look at the generational companies that just grow and grow and grow, they unlock some kind of solution that is addressing a problem encountered by many people altogether. And so what I like to look for is, okay, maybe we start with an individual that has some kind of problem that they encounter on a frequent basis. What does that look like when that individual then encounters that problem with their team or with other people in their lives? And can you find that adjacent use case? If you look at the companies over the last 10 years that just grew with really great mechanics, something like a Slack, for example, it's because of that lock-in, it's that network effect. I would consider network and lock-in through that network like another foundational law that companies just need to remember in this time. And yes, it's okay to go and spend a year, 2, 3, kind of in that hand-to-hand combat, unlocking the latest capability, getting to the cool new model use case. But once you've done that, you then need to find the next step, which transforms that hype. You said the wow factor. I want to say turn those wows into other wows, weekly active users. That's what companies need to be thinking about immediate to long term.
Somebody coined that? All right, because that was good. So Bryce, at Cognition, I mean, you're probably seeing the gap between somebody that's experiencing an AI-powered wow moment with like the first AI engineer, incorporating that into their workflows, especially probably, I imagine, in like product-led sales scenarios. But really, like, what are the top lessons here that any AI founder can make for products they're building, people that are integrating new AI features that require that level of maybe like understanding a new type of product or workflow or functionality within an organization? I know you deal with engineering probably a lot, but how does that look, and what are some reflections there?
Yeah, so when we think about really just the marketing in general, whether it's demos, whether it's marketing materials, it kind of just boils down to a couple key principles. It's like you're making a promise, you're making some sort of claim, and then you're trying to back up that claim with any sort of proof, right? Normally, your demos will fall into this sort of proof point, this proof material. But fundamentally, it's going along and saying, hey, this is the current state of your company. I can transform it from X to state Y via like product Z, and ultimately I'll show you how to do product Z. I think that's really sort of at the core, and it sounds obvious, but I think it's an abstraction level that people sometimes forget about, which is that ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a claim. It's a claim, and then it's proving that way. And so I think from there, once we have those sort of things established, really a lot of what we think about is how can we actually bring people into the funnel with the types of things that they need to see at the specific moments of their onboarding journey, right? So we have this internal the classification of sort of street performer dev tasks and then like junior developer dev tasks where, maybe someone's come along and give Devin a task which is like, oh, build a fun website, builds this like fucking app from scratch. We're aware that's not typically the main thing that we're going for, and it's not the main value prop that we need, but it's really one of these very, very important foundational building blocks of a user's onboarding journey. And I think that's really critical, which is how do we translate from you could call it like the hype that people have in their heads, this idea of like ADI Devin, and how do we actually translate that into real world value? And you have some of these mechanisms like, this is how we teach you country set in a very straightforward way. And then we view into the junior developer and then fixing the boring bugs, trying to backlog to fix that. So I think it's a gradual process that we each group people through.
Yeah, that's such a great fallout in terms of like there's so many things people could see, but making it easier for them, especially as it relates to to the motion. The next topic here is around like motion types, basically differentiating between like PLG and PLS for AI native products. And I'm sure some of us are debating how to approach that for certain feature sets or products that we're building. PLG has typically been the default for a lot of these products over time. And in AI, like Bryce is talking about, onboarding friction can be higher. Users may need a more personal touch at certain times, depending on the product or the use case. And that's where it basically starts to integrate, like, how do we layer in sales to these types of products and experiences? Supabase and Replit deal with a lot of this. But yeah, let's talk about how to navigate that. My first question is over for you, Brian. I've been in early customer Reforge, as I mentioned. I know you've seen how onboarding has to evolve when the product is complex, having dealt with a lot of sales products at HubSpot, a lot of different amazing like speakers of course the Reforge series that have talked about a lot of different problems. What's your advice for like AI native founders, product leaders, builders, balancing self-serve and basically high-touch AI-enabled onboarding for use cases like Bryce was talking about?
Yeah, I'm going to answer the question a little bit the different way. So there tends to be three, what leads the model, right? Like all these things layer on and mix over time, but the question is like what leads? Does the product lead to sales? Is it a sales-led motion or is it a forward deployed engineering motion, which is on the more of like the enterprise end of the spectrum? I think right now in the current market, I am unbelievably pessimistic about sales-led motions. I think they do like flat out do not work. Everything that I see working to a good enough degree, like where the economics and everything, it's on one end of the spectrum. It's either product-led with sales layered on, or it's forward deployed engineering. And there's a bunch of reasons for that I've been like trying to codify. But the stuff that's stuck in the middle right now is that there's just like, it's just like a bog full of mud because anything that touches AI or internal data systems, which most AI products do because you need their data and their context to form a really good output. The security, the legal, the IT, just like absolute garbage bullshit that you have to go through just ruins your economics. Like it literally takes months to go through a simple turn on a DPA or some other legal thing. It's unreal right now. And look, I think that might change because at some point all these companies are going to have a wake up moment and be like, why am I letting legal, security, and IT basically dictate the pace of my AI adoption? But it's going to take them getting kicked in the ass a couple times from competitors until like that happens. But right now in the market, everything that I see working with, there's a couple exceptions, is either on one end of the spectrum as the motion that they lead. It's either product-led or forward-deployed engineering. So my advisement to most folks right now, and I don't know why my chair keeps turning like this, but keep going back and forth, but is move to one end of the spectrum. Move to one end of the spectrum. Don't get caught in the middle right now because it's just like absolute like bloodbath at the moment.
That's great advice. Gaurav, I mean, Superhuman is famous, I think, for their onboarding experience.
Infos, maybe.
Yeah, 100%. So what's your take on like thinking back on that, companies you're advising right now? I know a lot of them are very heavy into the AI space and side of things. Like what are you seeing for like how high touch onboarding can layer into what Brian's also calling out with some of these more process oriented items that we all want to try to avoid and not enter a death spiral in terms of like a sales process? But what do you see in terms of high touch onboarding getting integrated based on what you've seen and experienced?
Yeah, great question. So just for context, I oversaw a team that onboarded hundreds of thousands of people at Superhuman. So I have a lot of thoughts on concierge onboarding. And then the transition to self-serve, I also saw the team that basically built that entire thing in the products. And so I have perspectives on both sides of that. What I'll say is a very clear point of view, and I wrote about this recently if folks want to go deeper on it in first round review, which is that I think every single startup needs to do some amount of hand-holding first when they launch their products. You need to do concierge onboarding with your very first customers. This is not how you scale. This is not how you go to market. You know, as per what Brian said, if you end up down that road and just continue to do the sales-led motion, there are some moments in time with the market where that will just bite you in the ass. What I'm saying is that you need to understand your customers and their problems. And when you get on a call with them and you handhold them through the product, you do that concierge onboarding, you set that customer up for success, first and foremost. So they're way more likely to retain, way more likely to give you the feedback you need to make your product better. And you get so much in return. You get bugs that you should fix. You get feature requests that you should go and add to your backlog. And you build an evangelist kind of group with your customers. So you should do that for some amount of time. And I think AI companies struggle with this. I see this with the startups that I advise because there is so much pressure to get to market. There is so much pressure to get that next number, to raise that next round. And what I see is some companies building products where they don't even know what problem that product solves. And sometimes they luck out and they build a product that just takes off and it's a use case that they didn't expect. And then they just go with it. But a surefire recipe for figuring out what's a real problem out there and then solving that is to go and talk to your customers. Now, does that mean you stick with that forever? Absolutely not. My strong perspective is that you need to basically wind that down as soon as you can and build an in-app onboarding that does as much lift as you can. Then where are you left with more of the personal touch for human stuff? That's what Brian said. It's working with IT, it's working with data, it's working with legal, security, etc. And anything you need from a forward deployed engineering standpoint to get your solution over the line, that's the more complex stuff. That's generally incredibly hard and actually not worth the engineering time to go and build into your product.
I just wanted to add on to that. I think that onboarding motion is 10x more important with AI products with non-deterministic experiences than even what Superhuman was with deterministic, because just of observing the non-deterministic experience. But two is I think most people take the mentality that that is a slower path to success, but you're getting mixed up with like what you're trying to do fast. What the thing you're trying to actually do fast in this market is learn as fast as freakingly possible. And this method actually lets you get those learning cycles in much quicker up front than being like super hands off. And so even though it might be slower to quote unquote get to market, you got to like kind of zoom out a little bit to understand like what is that point in the future that you're trying to get to and what are the things that help you get there the fastest.
Great comment, Bryce. I'm sure you have some opinions on this. What's been your biggest takeaway thus far, and then any reactions to what Brian and Gaurav mentioned?
Yeah, I'll start there actually. So, look, I think at Cognition and generally this pitch of an AI software engineer, it's a big claim, right? We're making a bold stance on where we think the future of software engineering is going. And that requires not only people using the product, but fundamentally kind of shifting it workflow. So we need people to not just, work single-threaded and have a copilot or a cursor or whatever it might be. But we're basically demanding that people kind of step back and become the manager of a fleet of agents, right? And that's a pretty fundamental shift in workflow. And for a while, we didn't really have a very powerful onboarding motion. We was doing the Superhuman way of going, which worked really well for us. Like it was really powerful. And I think to this day, we're still constantly reinventing the way that we onboard. I think onboarding is 10x. There's always 10x more important now than it was before, just because, or at least with the product that we're building, just because of the demand that we have on the customer. I think the other piece, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room are building agents or at least curious about building agents. One of the things that I'm always struck by when we onboard new engineers and we start to look through the agent trace is number one, how like stupid agents can be sometimes and how done the models are that interface some agents. For two is also how remarkably similar they think to the ways that humans think. In the ways they'll just try shit, they'll bump into a wall here, they'll mess up, they'll go somewhere else, and so on and so forth. And what it means is that a lot of the problems that agents run into are the exact same problems that humans will typically run into. And so we recently published this thing called DeepWiki. Maybe people have seen it, but it's basically like an index of your code, and it gives you like sort of documentation of all of that. And we'd actually been able to align a lot of the human problems with the agentic problems, and it makes it a much easier onboarding problems when it's like, oh, we have that problem too? Okay, we'll build a tool for Devin. Devin can use it, but also your humans can use it. And there's a really nice synergy about that if you can really align those two things. I think this is particularly coming up in the world of agents, especially as, we need to build some of these more custom tools for agents. They apply to Fuse just so.
So building on something you said there, so you start with the sort of hand-holding onboarding, and now you're constantly reinventing it, as I think every company should constantly be reinventing their onboarding and morphing it to where they are in the markets and what their customers need. One of the things that I think every company should think about, particularly if you're building with AI, where it's non-deterministic, you don't quite know exactly how each customer's use case will play out. And this is something I feel very passionate about, and as someone who grew up playing video games, which is possibly the space where onboarding has been nailed the most. right? Because you have such a limited amount of time to introduce such a high amount of complexity to the player. You want to hook that player in moments, right? Most of the onboardings that are self-serve in most products suck, right? It's annoying tooltips, checklists, things you never basically, you don't want to engage with them, and it piles up this clutter or cruft in the corner of your app, and it's not serving anybody, whether it's the user or the business. So my perspective, and this is especially true with AI products, is you need to be opinionated. If you listen to what Bryce said, it's like super opinionated from Cognition as to how people should be engaging with devs. This idea, every engineer becomes an eng manager with a fleet of junior engineers. That's a very opinionated stance. You're not saying, oh, just figure it out the way you want to use it. No, you have an opinion, all right? And you listen to the company's kind of talks on how this technology should be leveraged. Second thing is you want to be interruptive. I think you basically need to stop the user in their tracks and tell them, this is what you should be doing at this moment in time, right? This is the exact set of steps that you need to take right now. So again, they don't actually use that. And as an example, you need to integrate it into your Slack in this moment. If you don't, then everything downstream of there will suck, right? And then you can do, maybe it's a opinionated thing to say, listen, the first thing we're going to do is build a shitty landing page, and then we'll get you to the bug fixes, whatever. And you need to make it interactive, I would say. And this is especially great with AI products because they're so easy to jump into and be hands-on with. But if you're going to take agency away from the user to be interruptive and to be hyper-opinionated, at least give them something back in terms of something to play with, which is what I say is like interactive, because then it becomes fun. And if you think through opinionated, interruptive, and interactive, you basically get a video game, right? Like you get the first 10 minutes of Call of Duty or basically any Age of Empires. Any game that anyone here has played, right, had some little co-pilot guide thing that was helping you play your way through it in a very opinionated, interruptive, and interactive way.
Yeah, those are great calls. I'm going to skip to a particular topic that I think is relevant, which is around like building moats. And I think this is one of the biggest things that we have to be thinking about right now is how do we build moats around those opinionated experiences that we're using to create successful user experiences. It's pretty funny because a lot of these products right now, people are like, they have very high standards, but none of this stuff has ever existed before now. It's kind of an interesting balance. And, maintaining trust is like a component of that. And it's like, how do you balance that? But, building moats is kind of a pretty strategic topic because, OpenAI can go release something next week that fucks all of us or helps us, depending on how you look at it. So my first question around that, Brian, to you is just where are you seeing the strongest and most defensible moats in AI right now, especially with maybe blending motions, but expanding beyond that too, when you're thinking about OpenAI and some of these other players that we're all kind of revolving our lives around in some capacity. How do you think about that as it relates to, defensible moats, if anything's even possible around that right now?
This is the number one topic that is consuming my brain lately, and I think we could have dedicated the whole session to this. So I'll try to be short there, but I think there's two parts of that question. One is, look, historically we've had a number of different moats in technology, different types of network effects like direct network effects, cross-site network effects, data network effects, as well as a couple other things. And I think the first thing that we have to realize is that actually a lot of those moats, some have gotten stronger and some have gotten a lot weaker. And I don't think it's necessarily what people think. So a lot of people think like people-to-people direct network effects still a really strong thing. In some cases, like Slack you were mentioning earlier, I agree. But in social cases, I actually think those are way weaker than we think. Like, I don't know if any of you have played with Tolans before, Tolans, right? But you sign on, you talk to this little AI, alien, and it's empathetic with you, and it's funny and humorous, and it's entertaining. It's getting the dopamine effects going like super fast, right? So when I think about a direct network effect with people like Facebook, right, I'm looking at that as like, well, do I really need the network of people to create the same experience? No, actually, the AI can do it way better. It can do it way more personalized and in real time, endless content, like all of these different pieces. Same thing with cross-site network effects, supply and demand, right? Marketplaces exist to essentially reduce transaction costs, right? So you think about something like Thumbtack. Do I need to go on to Thumbtack and go through a bunch of fake reviews and submit this thing and I'm going to get a bunch of spam back? No, I go to deep research and I say, I live in Marin, Larkspur. I'm looking for a plumber like around this for this specific problem. And in a few minutes, it comes back with a pretty personalized result. It's reducing a lot of the transaction costs there. So I actually think those have actually weakened quite a bit. We'll see those weaken in the near term. But on the opposite side, data network effects, certain types of data network effects have gotten a lot stronger. And I think we're about to enter this moment that we should all be aware of. But this technology shift so far has not come with a distribution shift, like mobile or like social and some other things have before. And that is why this topic, distribution growth, is actually so hard for quite a few reasons, is there actually hasn't been an obvious new distribution channel that has emerged. And if anything, it's kind of destroying some, like SEO. But I think we're about to get the moment. And history is probably going to repeat itself. So I have a lot of gray hair. I've been around a lot longer than a lot of folks in this room in the technology industry. In 2007, Facebook launched their developer platform, their platform. They were only at about 25 million users. MySpace was still bigger than them. There was all of these other social networks. Their moat that they were trying to create at the time was the direct network effect. They needed way more people on the platform to get escape velocity around their moat. So they launched the developer platform. And there is this value exchange. There is this agreement. Developers, apps, we've created this nice little canvas for you. You put whatever you want in the canvas. You can monetize whatever you want in the canvas and keep it. It's yours. We just want the advertising on the side rail. We're going to help you with like a little bit of distribution and all that kind of stuff. Less than 2 years later, Facebook had 10x'd. They had been over 250 million users. They had gotten escape velocity on their moat. And guess what they did? They started peeling all of that stuff back. All of a sudden, they were like, actually, nope, we want a little bit of piece of that action that you have going on in the canvas. And they took it all the way to the extreme where they essentially killed the developer platform, sucked up most of the use cases, the biggest use cases, into their own product, and left everybody hanging, right? So what's about to happen? Well, it's pretty clear that OpenAI is about to repeat history. They are signaling that they are going to launch some type of platform with some type of value exchange. But the value exchange is different. The value exchange is that they want the data, the memory, and the context, because that is what they know creates great output. And as soon as they get escape velocity on that, they're going to put all these apps on the platform so there's more interaction, more data, more conversations, more memory. As soon as they have escape velocity on that, what are they going to do? They're either going to tax the whole ecosystem, everybody in this room, or they're just going to copy the biggest use cases and shut it down. One of those two things. So for all of you in the room, you need to know that that is the game that is coming. You've got to play it when it's a window and it's open and get that distribution, and you got to get off of it as fast as you possibly can. That's the game.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, any other comments? I've got some opinions to share too, but yeah, defensible moats, expanding on OpenAI, everything we're all dealing with.
So I think the topic of moats is super interesting, very strategic. I think, companies don't just have one moat, they have many moats. I like to imagine a castle with
They stack. That's right.
eccentric rings, or do they deepen? I'm not sure. But there are two moats that come to my mind that I think both are very important. And I'll use a case study here, a company advice called Superpower, which is in the AI health space. There are two moats that I think they are doubling down on that I think are very, very important if you can get them right. One is data, but it's proprietary data that's incredibly hard for even maybe an OpenAI to potentially get their hands on. And in Superpower's case, they want all your health data, right? Because they want to be the sort of like AI doctor, the brain that knows every single stat about your blood panel, every word from a recent doctor's visit. They want to know your medical history and your vaccines and everything going back as far as possible so that they can then give you the best healthcare. Huge market, a lot of money spent on healthcare, obviously. So I'm very bullish on the accumulation of that data as a potential moat. So is there an equivalent of that for your business? Is there a proprietary data set that will be extremely hard for other competitors to get their hands on, that will be extremely difficult for consumers to want to give to a big player like an OpenAI for privacy reasons or trust reasons? So that's kind of down the vector of data, right? And I think the other vector, and Superpower's doing this very well too, is brand, right? There's a lot of discussion in Silicon Valley right now about how brand is maybe the last defensible moat when, AGI is here and you can just build anything, at the snap of the fingers. Brand is what will set your company apart when people are trying to remember you versus your competition. And so I think it's incredibly important to invest in that brand. A lot of people ask, well, how do I do that? It's everything, right? Like it's the user experience, it's the product, it's how you respond to the support ticket. It's how you deal with an outage. It's everything about your company. There are a couple of core principles that I think are very important if you are investing in brand. And that is to develop your sense of taste so that when you take your company to market, it resonates with people. I think taste is like this core attributes that people can cultivate over essentially a lifetime, where it's just a case of inhuming a bunch of information and then producing. You're essentially kind of an LLM in that sense. You're training yourself on loads of data and then you're spitting it out and seeing if it's any good or not. Right? And then the more you do that, the more you apply yourself to the problem and then evaluate how resonant was that thing that I put out there, what can I improve, then you will get to results that do resonate more in the market. And that's ultimately how a brand gets built, as the emergent sort of property of something that is highly resonant.
I just want to point out three things. He's pointing out three things of nuances of brand. One is that, or moats. One is that they're time bound, so you have to stack them, right? You have to essentially sequence them. The second thing is that different moats have different ceilings, right, in terms of value that they create. And the third is that they have different levels of fragility. You didn't say this exactly, but brand, yes, it can be a moat, but it's also the most fragile one. And so they all have these different attributes of pros and cons.
Yep. Yeah. One of the areas I'm probably the most opinionated on right now is brand as a component of what makes it. And I'm going to get really tactical on brand and say that I think the biggest differentiator is when the brand is associated with some person in the company that is actively voicing an opinion of what's happening in a particular space. Because right now we're all fucking struggling to say, where do I get information? Okay, fuck it, I'm going to ChatGPT or Perplexity or wherever, because search is a pain in the ass now. But then we go to people. We go to people that we follow, people that we listen to in the space. And I think the biggest opportunity for founders, PMs, whoever's building stuff right now is like having an opinion and like really putting yourself out there a little bit more. There's a lot of ways to create like predictability and growth engines on the back end of that. But if you haven't already started that, that's, in my opinion, probably only other thing that is defensible right now is you as a person being out there. It could be a founder, it could be a leader in the company that's using the tech to actually build or basically go about their day-to-day. But yeah, that's my personal opinion. And I think Remlet does that very well with their founder, Amjad. I don't know if anyone follows him on Twitter or X. He's great with that. Same with the Superbase team. They really extended brand from their founders to, I don't know if anyone's seen their memes or anything like that on X, but those blow up and those get a lot of good attention. But yeah, over to Bryce if he's got anything else.
Do we have time? Okay, I'll just quickly, I think these are all fantastic points. I think there's also this, emerging narrative, especially in Silicon Valley, especially in the startup ecosystem, that, moats are kind of less strong, at least in this current moment of time, than they've ever been. I think number one is about really turning your company into an insight generation machine. So we really try to do this. We're trying to stay very, very close to customers. That's why we do a lot of these onboardings. Both from a product perspective, but I think there's also a very interesting emergent like personality identification machine that we're starting to see, which is really trying to nail down who are the types of people from like a personality perspective that we really want to put debit in the hands of, for example. I think people don't think about this piece enough, but how do you attract, everyone always talks about the early adopters, but I really encourage you to think like one level deeper with that. You talk to any of your engineering managers, in my case, for example, this applies to others, but you talk to your engineering managers, they know who the people on their team are who are going to really push this forwards. I think that's one. I think second as well, especially as we start to build this new world of whether it's engineering, whether it's customer success, whether it's anything, it's always the case that users and humans are less malleable than the AIs, right? So user preference is huge. And as you educate people into that new environment, really being the one to be able to do that, and whether it's as simple as like superhuman shortcuts, right? Even like that's the most basic example of this. It plays a very significant role in preferences and how that brings that person at time. So, but yeah.
I would just layer on is like, I agree. Like there is now this new thing that's like floating around, like speed is the only moat left. And people are talking about it in a binary way. And I think that's the wrong way to talk about it. The right way to talk about it is like speed has become table stakes. And actually we're just in this moment in time of old moats are basically being weakened and new moats are going to start to emerge. We're just in the middle of that transition. and we haven't actually seen the new moats like really start to take shape. But we will, and the only way to get there is to use speed as your advantage.
Last comment, and then we'll wrap up. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A, but you can come find us if anyone wants to talk to us later. The last inevitable moat, I think, that also exists that we didn't touch too much on is community within products. And that can basically be within your customer base. It can be a lot of different areas. But I think that alongside like brand as an essence of both a person, a company, whatever that looks like, but actually building relationships as part of like real communities, which can be defined in a lot of different ways for different products. It does stem from having somebody that has an opinion that could be of value, I think, to the community. But I think that's, and I think you've done a great job at Reforge. I think Raul has done that at Superhuman very well. I know Devin's got like really notable founders that are part of that as like its essence. But that's my last comment. And yeah, thank you guys for listening and sitting in on us.